Testing my mic here. Alright, that sounds good enough. Now let me switch my overlay here. And there we go. Why is my hair standing? Fix that. Looks good enough. So, yeah, welcome back to my stream. Today, for a change, we are gonna learn, or rather, in my case, refresh upon HTML and CSS a bit. So I already know HTML and CSS. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I have made websites and stuff on Flask. In fact, I done so in my job too. But I, refresher ain't, uh, refresher ain't gonna be. It's gonna be good, right? A refresher is what I'm trying to say. If I can form my words and sentences straight, that is. And yeah, refresher ain't bad. So I'm gonna go ahead and start a tutorial on HTML and CSS. Then of course, you know what comes next, JavaScript, and maybe the main aim here is to go into some kind of JS, or maybe possibly use TypeScript or something like that. Move on to some framework of some kind, maybe React, maybe Express. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see when we get there. For now, let's just start with our day one of learning HTML and CSS. So here we go. So am I yeah, I'm sharing my screen like that. Right. So I think this is the first stream where I actually use VS Code. We've been using Google Colab for the PyTorch course, haven't we? So here goes.
To go from nothing to HTML. Welcome to the #1 HTML and CSS course. This course is for absolute beginners to go from nothing to a professional level in HTML and CSS. In this course, we will build 2 beautiful projects from scratch, and you don't even need any previous experience because we will start from absolute scratch. So don't look anywhere else. I've seen what's out there. I've been a developer for years myself, and this is the best resource to get started with coding HTML and CSS. I wish this course existed when I got started with web development. So if you go through this course, you will be able to write HTML and CSS code at a professional level. You will also be capable of avoiding hundreds of beginner mistakes that I often see beginners make. And as a bonus, you will even learn modern design tips and tricks. My name is Wesley, by the way. I'll be your instructor. I'm a web developer. I've built hundreds of projects, and now I'm condensing all of this knowledge into this course, so that in just a couple of hours you can learn everything you need to know about HTML and CSS. Now, before we even jump into it, why should you even learn HTML and CSS? Well, maybe you've noticed, but there is insane growth in web development right now. And the reason for this is that the economy is still moving to the web. There's still an ongoing digital transition. And you would think that
By
we
the
all
way, the tutorial, the instructor's name is Wesley. This is the first time that I'm going through a tutorial from, was it Minecraft? That's the channel name. Yeah, I think this is gonna be a good course. So fingers crossed. Let's start.
already very far along the digital transition. But if you look at data, for example, e-commerce data, you can see that a lot of transactions are still offline, right? So all of this will come online in the coming years. So all of these websites and all these tools, they have to be built by web developers, right? And to create websites, well, we have 3 pillars: HTML, CSS, and the other one is JavaScript. So in this course, we're gonna focus on the first 2 pillars. So this is a really fast-growing industry, and there's never really been a better time to get into it than right now. So how is this course structured? So in section 1, we'll start off with the most common things you need to know about HTML and CSS. Really, just what are the most common concepts? What do you see the most in practice? Because I've built a ton of projects, and I looked into the code of them to see the most common concepts, and that's where we'll start. And then in section 2, we'll build a simple website from scratch, step by step, with those fundamentals. And then in section 3, we'll take it to the next level, and we'll look at more intermediate concepts. And finally, in section 4, we'll build a beautiful real-world website from scratch using everything we learned. Now, coding can be intimidating, and every developer goes through this. But if you go through the course, you will become much more confident, and you'll walk away with much more clarity. So really try to make it all the way to the end. It's really worth it. So then let's get into it. I'm on Windows, but everything works the exact same on Mac, so that's not an issue. However, you will need 2 things. We're going to write code, and people use a code editor for this. The most popular one right now is Visual Studio Code. So go ahead and install this one, right? So you can just click here, and you can go through the installation. You can pause the video, and once it's finished, you can continue the video. So we're going to create websites, right? And we visit websites in a browser, right? So the most popular one is Chrome at the moment. We will use that in the course, so I recommend that you use it as well. Welcome to section 1. In this section, we're going to talk about the HTML and CSS fundamentals. So I have analyzed hundreds of my projects to see the most common concepts, and here they are. So we're going to start off with HTML. HTML is, you could say, the raw content or the information that we want to display to the user. And HTML uses so-called tags. So for example, if you have a paragraph, you would use the P tag, and we'll talk about what that means. If you have a heading, we have a different tag. If you want to have a button, well, we have a tag for that. And so all of these tags are, really the most common ones that you see here. And the HTML document usually has a certain structure. So we're going to start off by looking at that overall structure. And then at the end, there are usually also other resources that we want to include in our HTML. For example, a font or icons or even CSS, right? So let's talk about CSS. CSS is what we use to style that content. So in CSS, we have selectors, right? So we have to select the element, and we'll talk about what an element is. We have to select the element that we want to style. We can style the font. There's a box model with padding, border, and a margin. We have colors in CSS, of course, and you can use colors in different ways. And there's all sorts of other things that you have to know about CSS, but these are really the 11 most important concepts. And then we'll also look at some other things throughout this course. And here we'll look at two things. So we're going to look at the inspect feature in browsers, right? Also called the DevTools. And also we'll look at how to automatically refresh the page when you make a change. All right. So don't worry if you don't understand anything here. I'm already expecting you to be completely new and maybe even already confused. That's completely normal. But now we're going to take care of that by looking at HTML. All right. So I have opened up my code editor, which is Visual Studio Code. I recommend that you use this one as well. So if you haven't downloaded this yet, go ahead and do that. So if you have opened it up, the way it works is you need to open a folder. So you can click on this icon or you can click on File and then Open Folder. I will click here. I will click on Open Folder, and here, in your file system, you're gonna have to, pick a folder or maybe create a new one, right? So let's see. I'm gonna put my folder somewhere. I'm gonna create a new one actually. So I'm gonna create a new folder. I'm gonna call it HTML CSS Fundamentals, and then I'm gonna select that folder and it will open it up here in my code editor, right? So this is all you need to do to get started. And then in here, we're gonna put the files that we're gonna need. So the first file that we're gonna have, right, since we're starting off with HTML here, is an HTML file. So we're gonna click on New File, and we'll give it a name of index.html. So why index? I'm gonna press Enter here, by the way. Why index.html? Why this weird name? Well, this is a bit of a remnant from the past.
Hmm. You know what? That's a good question. Like I've always seen people use the file name index.html, but I've never wondered why. Maybe it's one of those conventions, weird conventions that developers have. Maybe. Um, yeah, maybe that might be it. Not sure.
And people have stuck with this, right? So this is just a typical name that you will commonly see.
There we go.
You can give it any name you want, by the way. It could be homepage.html or about.html. As long as the extension is .html, the browser will understand what to do with it. All right, so let's talk about the overall structure of an HTML document, as it's also called. So I'm going to close the sidebar here, so we have a little bit more space. So you can do that by clicking and dragging this to the left. And if you want to open it up again, you simply
Oh,
click on
look
the
at
next
that.
button.
Our viewer count is increasing. Hey, 2 hour came into the stream right now.
Okay, so what does the overall structure of an HTML document look like? So it's basically a tree of HTML elements, and the root element is the HTML element itself. So what you can write is an opening tag, and you use the smaller than symbol, and then the name of the tag, and then the greater than symbol. And as soon as you do that, the code editor will automatically give you, well, the other part, which is the closing tag, right? So this is what we refer to as an opening tag, and this is what we call the closing tag, and this entire thing is what we call an element, okay? So this is going to be a tree-like structure, so then in here, we're going to have other elements, right? So it becomes this nested tree-like structure. So the two common elements that we have here are, for example, body, right? So this is body, right? And you can see body, I'm indenting that here because it's an element in another element, right? So typically you indent that. Indentation means it has horizontal space, right? So then in the body, here is where you would put the actual content, the actual information that you want to broadcast to the world, right? So what we could say here is say, hello world, right? And then the other element in
Of
the
course,
HTML
we
element
need
here.
to do our sacred ritual whenever we start with a new language or a new. Uh, is HTML language? I don't know. There's a whole debate around it, isn't there? Anyhow, let's do our hello world ritual here. And I know that somewhere in the video is gonna install live servers, so might as well do it right now. Oh, you know what? Let's just follow along with the tutorial. Let's just open this the normal way. Uh, Speaking of which, how do you open it the normal way? Yeah. I know with live server, you just need to. There's a button or something over there. Uh, Come on.
Here
Okay,
that you typically see
real
is the head element.
twice.
So you can say head. And in here, well, people call this the metadata. Well, what does it mean? Well, basically, it's information that is sort of relevant to the information in the body. So, for example, the title of the page. And more typically, you would link to external resources in here as well. So, for example, if you want to use a different font or certain icons, you have to get the font and the icons from somewhere. So you need to link to them. Well, you put the link in the head, right? So, for example, well, let's take the title as an example, right? So we can use title, and here we can put the title of the page. So we can say, well, HTML and CSS fundamentals, right? And now let's actually try opening this up in the browser to see if this works. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And let's see, I have opened up my browser, which is Google Chrome. I recommend that you use the same one because there are some differences between them.
How did you open it up? to reopen it
So
up
you can
through
say
here.
hat.
So
And in here, well, people call this the metadata. Well, what does it mean? Well, basically, it's information that is sort of relevant to the information in the body. So, for example, the title of the page. And more typically, you would link to external resources in here as well. So, for example, if you want to use a different font or certain icons, you have to get the font and the icons from somewhere. So you need to link to them. Well, you put the link in the head, right? So, for example, well, let's take the title as an example, right? So we can use title, and here we can put the title of the page. So we can say, well, HTML and CSS fundamentals, right? And now let's actually try opening this up in the browser to see if this works. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And let's see, I have opened up my browser, which is Google Chrome. I recommend that you use the same one because there are some differences between browsers and we don't want to run into issues with that right now. So the way to open this is you can click and drag this onto the top part here of your
all right, that didn't work. Where is something wrong
browser. And then it should
here? Okay, maybe I dropped it at the wrong place. Ah, there we go.
open it up. And indeed, we see hello world. Let me close the alt
There
tab.
we go.
Let me make this
Of
a little bit
course.
bigger. Right, so this is
I
an
mean,
HTML document that we
technically,
just
of
opened up in the
course,
browser. Let me make it a little bit wider
HTML
here.
file
And you
in
can see
this
it's a little bit
way.
small, but you can see at the top that it says the HTML and CSS fundamentals. That's the title, right? So if you change that, if I remove fundamentals, right now when I change, very important, you have to save the file, right? So if you try opening this up and you don't see anything, make sure you save the file. So now I made a change, and now I need to save the file again, right? And then I come back here and I can refresh. And you can see the title has changed, right? I'm going to undo this, Control C for me, right, so this is how a very basic structure of an HTML document looks like. All right, now doesn't mean that every time you create a new HTML document that you have to write out this entire structure, and the answer is no. You also don't have to memorize this. So people typically don't write this out in practice. People use a different way. So let's actually remove all of this. So what we're going to do in Visual Studio Code, you can write HTML, and Visual Studio Code comes with a functionality called emmet, and emmet helps us out in HTML and CSS files. So emmet gives us some suggestions, right? So we have 3 suggestions, and you can use the up and down arrow key on your keyboard. And if we pick the second one and then press enter or tab, it will actually give us an HTML boilerplate out of the box, right? And this is what people use in practice. So that's also what we're going to do. Now, it looks a little bit different from what we had just before. So let's look at the difference here. Let's start at the top. So at the top, we have this weird doc type HTML declaration. And this just tells the browser that it needs to use the latest HTML5 standard. And then we also have our HTML element again. But now it also has this, what we call an attribute. So in the opening tag, we can have other information, and these are attributes. So here it says something about the language of the page. It's saying that this page is in English, right? And this may help, search engines, right? So Google, for example, Google crawl.
Is this? Nah, this text is maybe a bit bigger. This looks good enough. I would argue. So
All
let's
websites. So
keep
Google
this.
eventually comes to your website, and Google wants to know what language your website is in, so that it can index it properly.
Also,
That when people search on Google, and somebody doesn't speak English, they don't see this page in Google, right? So search engines use this, and also it's for accessibility. Okay. So then in head, we now also have some other weird things. We have meta tags here, and these meta tags are not so important to understand, but basically what it comes down to is this is for the
so back up. Why did I do that? Up.
it
It
looks
is.
like. All right, now doesn't mean that every time you quickly go all tab from what it needs to attribute that this page is in English, right? And this may have you can have, and then we also have our HTML element again with declaration, enter or tab. It will actually give us an HTML boilerplate out of the box, right? And this is what people use in practice. So that's also what we're going to do. Now, it looks a little bit different from what we had just before. So let's look at the difference here. Let's start at the top. So at the top,
I
we have
don't
this weird
have
doc
the.
type HTML declaration, and this just
I
tells the
don't
browser
have
that
a
it needs to use the
filter.
latest HTML5 standard. And then we also have our HTML element again, but now it also has this what we call an attribute. So in the opening tag, we can have other information, and these are attributes. So here it says something about the language of the page. It's saying that this page is in English, right? And this may help, search engines, right? So Google, for example, Google crawls all websites. So Google eventually comes to your website, and Google wants to know what language your website is in, so that it can index it properly. So that when people search on Google, and somebody doesn't speak English, they don't see this page in Google, right? So search engines use this, and also it's for accessibility. Okay. So then in head, we now also have some other weird things. We have meta tags here. And these meta tags are not so important to understand, but basically what it comes down to is this is for the character set. So this tells the browser that, how to interpret the characters that it encounters in this file. This has to do with Microsoft Internet Explorer. So Internet Explorer was a pretty popular browser back in the day, but it's a legacy browser now, and people have moved away from it. Microsoft has a new browser called Edge, and Internet Explorer, yeah, it's just that there's a small percentage of people who still use it, and depending on your exact project, you have to also take care of them. And this is one of those tags that helps people
I
with Microsoft.
mean, who uses Internet Explorer these days? I have. I don't take this with a grain of salt. But from memory, I've seen a video where they say that I think it was Japan where people still, or businesses rather, still use Internet Explorer for some reason or the other. And I mean, they should change. Like, gosh, I can't. Have I even used Internet Explorer? I don't think so. I mean, I think Internet Explorer was popular before I was born. Not, yeah. Anyhow,
Internet Explorer, right? That's not really important to understand. And the other meta tag has to do with responsiveness, right? So we're going to make our website look good on mobile, on tablet, on laptop, on desktop, and we need this tag to make that work, okay? But we'll talk more about responsiveness later. This is the typical HTML boilerplate that people use in modern HTML files. Now I'm going to add a space here. I'm just going to press enter, right? That won't change anything. And oh, one other thing, by the way, it looks a bit strange, but now the head and the body elements, they are not indented anymore, right? So the head and the body, they're still in the HTML element, but they don't have horizontal space, right? And I don't know why this is. I think it just looks better, but for some reason they don't have horizontal space in the typical boilerplate here. Let's actually change the title here to, let's actually think of an example. Let's say that we're creating a website. Maybe we have a company, we do guided tours in Rome, right? So maybe we create a website for that. We wanna allow people to book our tours online, on our website. So we could say guided tours in Rome, right? So maybe we sell these tours on our website, so people can come to our website and they can book a tour with us. So if you change this, we have to make sure that we save here, and then we can go back to the browser, and let's see if I refresh now. Well, this is gone because we have nothing in the body now, and now we have our new title here, and we have a modern HTML boilerplate. All right, so let's fill out our website a little bit. So a very common tag that you want to use in the body here is the P tag for paragraphs, right? Because any website usually has text, and previous
In HTML, what is the like conventional indent use? What type of words? I heard, oh, thank you, Tommy, for subscribing. Tommy Elbro. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, what type of indent is used in HTML by convention? That is, many developers choose to use first space or two space indentation. Well, I use first space indentations always since I use Python, but is that the convention or we use a first space unless we find out that the convention is something else later?
previously we just wrote hello world, right? Just loose.
Because he's using, I reckon that's just two spaces at first, but it is what it is. So let's just
Like text
let's
in the body.
just roll
But
with it.
usually you want to be more specific and you want to structure your content in these tags, right? So here, for example, this is what we would say, maybe a heading or maybe a paragraph, right? So here on our website, we can have something like our guided tours cover all Roman attractions. Now, let me actually make it full screen for a second, right? So this is a paragraph and we have a p tag in HTML. So what we can write is p, right? And we'll give you the closing tag automatically. So I'm going to copy that and remove it here and then paste it right here, right? So this is the entire element. This is an HTML element. This is the opening tag. This is the closing tag. And we call this a p tag, right? So this is what we call an HTML element, or also called just element, right? So then if we save here, and now, whoops, if I refresh now, you can see we have some
Yeah,
text on
there
the
we
page,
go.
right? Structured as a paragraph element. And that actually also already gives it some styling, right? So the browser, it looks at these tags and it has some default styling, right? So you may not notice it right now, but you can see this text was bigger than the text that we had before, right? Before we had hello world without any tags, and it was smaller. Here it has certain styling, right? We'll talk more about that later. Okay, let's talk about headings in HTML. Let me actually make it a little bit bigger. I'm gonna actually make it overlap a little bit, right? So usually we don't only have text, but text usually also has like a heading, right, to indicate a
I think
particular
that's the
section.
default styling that's applied to all P taxes in it. Let's just remove this to see the change. So I guess there's just a bit of what's the technical word? I always mess up this. Is it padding or but I already forgot the other term that was padding and margin, right? I think it's padding. Default padding is using on p tags or something.
Right, so for
Yeah,
example, we could have a heading that says something like book your Rome guide here. And since this is the most important heading on the page, we would use a so-called H1 tag with that. That's what we're going to create here. So we could say book your Rome guide here, right? And since it's the most important heading, we use H1, right? We also have H2, H3, but those are less important than H1,
they get
right? So if I save here
smaller.
and now go back,
It's it. You would think the reverse though, right? Like as the number increases, you would increase the size to increase, but with header tags, it's the opposite. H1 is the biggest, if I'm not wrong. That is yep, it's the biggest, all right.
let me actually make it a little bit wider again. Now you can see we have a pretty big heading here, right? So this is what I meant with default styling. The browser sees, oh, this is an H1 element. And an H1 element, well, it indicates a certain importance, right? So the browser has some default styling for that, so it makes it pretty big, and also it makes it bolder, right? You can see the contrast with just normal text or with a normal paragraph element. Okay, so that's for the most important heading on the page. You know, in practice, you're only going to have one of these, right? Because you can only have one heading that is the most important. Now we also have other headings. So we have, for example, also H2. So you can imagine we have other sections on our website. So for example, we can have any questions, right, or frequently asked questions, right? And we could create a heading for that, right? So if we save here, you can see we now have another heading, and you can see it's a little bit less big than the other one, right? So H2, there's a certain hierarchy, right? So H2 is less important than H1. We can also have H3, H4. These are all less important than H2, right? And then it goes all the way until H6. All right, another very typical tag is the button tag. So let's say after this text here, we want to have a button that says something like book now, right? Book now, right? And if I save here and refresh, now we have a button, right? And if you click on it, well, nothing happens right now. In practice, you would use JavaScript to actually do something, right? Maybe have like a pop-up or like a modal
There you
with
go.
the user can
Yeah,
book
one
a tour,
button right
maybe, or
now.
maybe redirect to a different page. In that case, we would use an anchor tag, actually. We'll talk about that in the next part. But you can see the button also has some default styling, right? So it has this border. We'll talk about what a border is. It also has this background color, which is a bit difficult to see, but it's light gray, right? It's not white. And also when we hover it with our mouse, right? Me hovering means going over here with our mouse, it gets a different background color, right? That's a button. Usually we also want to link to other parts of our website, other pages, and sometimes even a completely different website. So typically what you use for this is the anchor tag, and typically you see this in the header, right? So at the top of the website, you can have like a login link or sign up link, right? So if you would click on that, you would go to the sign up page or the login page, right? So we're not going to do that here, but we have a different situation where we may want to use that. So for example, here with any questions, we can say, you can contact us here, for example, you can contact us here, right? And then what we would want is that if the user clicks on here, they go to a page where there's a form, perhaps, where they can fill out their question, right? So here right now, this is just a paragraph element, right? So if I click on here, nothing
The
happens yet.
anchor
But now
tag.
we can use the anchor
Okay.
tag, right? And I'm gonna copy the closing tag here and put it at the end of the word here. So now we have an anchor element, right? And again, we can nest these elements, right? So now we have an anchor element in the paragraph element, right? So this whole HTML document will become a tree of these elements. So let's actually save here and see what we get. And right now, actually nothing happens, right? So if I click on here, nothing happens, because with anchor tags, you also have to specify where the user should go if they click on it, right? And we do that with an attribute. That means in the opening tag, you can have other information, and the attribute here is called href. So if you write href and then the equal sign, we get the quotation marks. But then in here, we can link to the particular website or the particular page the user should go if they click on it. So for example, well, I can link to Google, and I have to use if it's a different website, I have to use the HTTPS google.com, right? So if I do this and refresh, now you can see it has different styling, right? So now it became blue and it has this underline, and this is very typical styling for anchor tags. You'll see this all the time. So if we click on this, we go to Google, right? So this is how you can link to other websites, and if it's a different page on the same website, for example, the contact page, right? But the domain is the same, then you would use /contact, right? So if I save here, we don't have that here, so it's not going to work. But this is how you would do it in practice. All right, let's add an image to our page, because a website without any images and only text is a little bit boring. So what we can do, let's add the image at the top of our page here. I can press enter here. And by the way, about these enters, right, I can press enter as many times as I want. If we do this and save here and refresh, that doesn't change anything here, right? So also this enter here, this is space, we're just adding that for structure, so it looks a little bit better, you know, to us as developers. But that doesn't really change anything. All right, so let's add the image here. So we have an image opening tag, and the image does not have a closing tag, right? So this does not exist, right? Only an opening tag. And then the browser wants to know, okay, so where can I find the image? What's the link? So we have a source attribute, and here we're going to paste the link of the image. Now I found the image on Unsplash. Unsplash is a website where you can find, you know, all sorts of very nice free photos, and it comes without any strings attached. So you don't have to give, you don't have to ask for permission. You don't have to give attribution. You can just use them, right? So I've searched for something like tour guide.
The lover tour guide is going to be Pikachu.
Right? And you'll find all sorts of images that you can use, right? This is where developers get most of their images from, right?
Why?
So I found an image, and
Because
you can find a link to this one in the description below the video, right? So if you're coding along with me, you can just copy that and you can paste it right here,
I'm a fan of
right? So I'm just
Pokemon.
pasting it right here,
Alright.
and we then save and refresh. Now we have
How
an
do
image.
I
All right,
save the link though?
here in the description below the video, right? So if you're coding along with me, you can just copy that and you can paste it right here, right?
Yeah, but how do I? Not again. Oh, okay. There we go. For the sake of it, I'm gonna replace Pikachu with where's the
Right. So if you
alright.
found an image, right, and you'll find all sorts of images that you can use, right? This is where developers get most of their images from. right? So I found an image, and you can find the link to this one in the description below the video, right? So if you're coding
Description below the video. Hmm. Maybe you might have forgotten to add that. Why is this picture of Pikachu labeled Winnie the Pooh plush toy photo? Okay, that's weird. Anyhow, ROM to a guide. Yeah, this looks good enough. And if you go here, I mean here, place that, and okay.
along with me, you can just copy that and you can paste it right here, right? So I'm just pasting it right here. And if we then save and refresh, now we have an image. All right, another common tag is the UL tag, or if you have some kind of list. So for example, in our website here, let's say we have another section here. I will create an H2 for this section. We could have some information about the particular attractions that are included in these tours. Right, so we could say attractions included, and then, well, if I save it, let's actually see what we get. Okay, so now this section here, you could say is still empty, but now we can have a list of attractions. So we have the UL tag, right, and then in here, we have LIs. So the way that these lists are structured is that you have list items, right? So then here we could say something like Colosseum, right? And then if you have another item of this list, you would simply have another LI, right? So maybe Roman Forum, right? And then another one could be, I don't know, Palatine Hill, right? So if we do this and save here and refresh, now we have this list that comes with bullet points styling as a default. Okay, so now I want to talk about the div tag. The div tag is something that you'll see, pretty often, and there's not really a semantic or like.
All right, there you go. What happens if you don't use unlisted UL? UL stands for unlisted, right? I guess it does. But anyway, let's see what happens. You don't have that kind of spacing before the bullet points. Just add that back again.
Like HTML reason to use the div tag. The div stands for divider, or define. Now we have this list that comes with bullet points styling as a default. Okay, so now I want to talk about the div tag. The div tag is something that you'll see, pretty often, and there's not really a semantic or like HTML
I think the div tag is out there as at least one of the most commonly used tags in HTML.
reason to use the div tag. The div stands for divider, or dividing up the sections. So for example, here we basically have 3 sections, right? So we have this book your Rome guide here. This is one section, and then we have this section here, and then we have this section here, right? So in our HTML, we've added enters here to make it look like different sections to us. But there's also a tag to make that a little bit more explicit, you could say. And this is mostly necessary for styling, right? So it will become more clear why we do this once we start, working with CSS. But typically, you put these sections not just loosely in the body element like this, but usually you have a div element, right? So we're gonna put all of this in a div element. Right, so by the way, if I want to
All about sorry. So from our H1 till our button tag. Gotcha. Let's put that in a div tag now.
indent here, right? So now I've pasted it here and I lost the indentation. If I want the indentation back, I can press tab, right? It will give me that horizontal space, right? So you would put all of these sections in a div. And the biggest benefit of doing this is that it helps with styling.
I think it's more of a code management thing, isn't it?
Right, so I'm just going to
And
paste
people
here.
use a div tag. Yep, let's wrap this also in a div tag. For the sake of it, let's also end it.
Okay, so now I want all of this indented, right? So I can select all of this and then press tab. All right, let's also do this here. And the last one here, let's see. Okay, now if you do this and save the file and go back and refresh.
What's a dir tag? That's the first time that I've seen such a tag. It's not about HTML5. Okay. So list directory titles. That's good to know. That's good to know. Alright. I usually when I wanna view the camera by instinct, I look at that side of where my chat is instinctive instinctive. There you go. Good as to me. All right, let's
Nothing
continue.
changed, right? So this doesn't change anything. It's just for styling that we have some additional markup here to
Oh
distinguish
wait, I didn't. I don't need to put this inside the
between the
tag for
different
now.
sections. And that will become more clear once we start working with C. For style, you do this and save the file and go back and refresh. Nothing changed, right? So this doesn't change anything. It's just for styling that we have some additional markup here to distinguish between the different sections. And that will become more clear once we start working with CSS. There is another element that is another tag that is very similar to the div tag, which is the span tag. So for example, here in this H1 here, book your Rome guide here. Maybe we want, Rome guide. Maybe this should be bolder or bigger, or it has have a different color, right? So maybe we want to give this some special styling. And again, we'll talk about that in CSS. But if you want to give this a special styling, we need to make this its own element, right? So this is also one of the reasons why we use div. So we could use a div here, right? Divider, right? So if we do this and we wrap the Rome guide part
Isn't it more common to use a span tag? I think that's what Wesley is trying to
in div,
explain, maybe.
right? So if we do this and now refresh, you can see that Rome guide here actually, sort of, it actually takes up its own line, right? So that's what happens with a div. A div takes up its own line. So this word
Yeah.
here cannot come
So,
after it, right?
oh,
Because this is a
that's
div.
the
And a div
reason why
takes off
people use
the
span
here word,
tag.
out of its own
Okay.
line, right? So you're gonna get this layout. Also, book your cannot be on the same line, right? Because the div takes up the entire line. Right, so that's sort of we can change that in CSS, but this is how a div is styled or looks like as a default. So an alternative, if you want to have this Rome guide stay in line with the rest, we have a span tag for that. Right, so people typically use a span for this. Right, span is basically the equivalent to div, but with span everything stays in line. Okay, so almost finished here with the HTML part. The last tag or last tags really that are in my opinion very important and very common is the form tag or also with the input tag. So for example, here we have any questions, you can contact us here. Maybe we don't want to redirect them to a different page. Maybe we can have a form right here, right? So we can have form, right? This is the tag. And then typically in a form, you have the input field, right? So we use an input tag for that. The input field does not have a closing tag, okay? So if you save here, okay, so when you do that, we see an input here at the bottom, right? And if you click on that, it will get that black outline.
Okay, that and
Type of looking styling to make it look
and of
focused.
course it.
And you can type text
Yeah.
here, right? So blah, blah,
Anyhow.
how much is option X, right? Now, typically, there's also a button to submit the input, right? Or the input text. So we can also have a button element in the form, and we can type submit, right? So if we do this, and now reload, you can see we have an input here, and then we can type some text, blah, blah, and then we can submit this to the server. Right? You don't need to know what a server is. It's the back end of the website. But this is very typical. This is a very typical form. Now let's say the user could have a pretty long question. It could span multiple lines. In that case, it's better to use the text area element or tag. The text area element actually does have a closing tag. So if you do this, this is actually the same as the input, but
That's another tag I didn't know existed in HTML. Text area. I don't think it's used that much. So I haven't. I mean, I've seen it visually, but not in HTML. But anyhow, let's continue with this. Hey, just gonna copy this. As it's on scroll bar.
a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Right? So now it will go on multiple lines. Right? So I think this is a little bit more suitable for this type of form. You can even resize it, right? But input is also very common. The input is actually more common. This is also used, for example, if you have like a login form, right? The username and a password. You don't need multiple lines for that. You just have one line. Another thing to be aware of is external resources. So, for example, if we go up all the way here to the top of our file in the head element, we can add some space, and here we can link to external resources. So, for example, maybe we don't like the font of this, the default font. So we can go to Google Fonts. This is a free service by Google. And we can find a font that we like. So for example, maybe we like the Roboto font and click on that. And I always find this website a little bit difficult to navigate. It also recently changed. So let's see. Okay, so here we have different font weights, right? So a font consists of different weights. So we have the regular weight, the medium weight, and let's also add the bold weight. Right, so here it shows you the weights, and then it says here how to use this on your website. So we have to copy the code here in the head of our HTML. So these are basically 3 link tags, and the first 2 are just for optimization, so that it's faster to download. We don't really need this. The third one, however, we do need. Right, so if we copy that one, and we go back to our HTML,
Well, the first two are for
our
what?
HTML. So these are basically 3 link tags, and the first 2 are just for optimization, so that it's faster to download. We don't really need this.
Alright.
The third one, however, we do need. Right, so if we copy that one,
Well, we're gonna take different tag. I mean, that's not a different tag. Choose a different font. Is my voice getting cut off? I think it is getting cut off here and there, isn't it? It's just this caught my eye. So let's use this one. Um, what do I need to do now? Uh, hey, looks good, but how do I get this? Alright, cool, but how do I get the link here? I get them, but what? Um, let's just copy the last line here.
And we go back to our HTML. Whoops, let's see if I can structure this. So here, if we paste that link, we are now including an external resource, right? So it says a rel or relationship.
Hey
It
to
says here this is a
whoever
style sheet.
joined
Right? So
this
this is actually
stream right
CSS,
now,
and we'll talk about CSS in
welcome
a
to the
second.
stream.
But basically, what this link will do, if you save here and reload, well, we don't see any change.
So we need to add this in the head. That only. Oh, we have already copied the link as such.
The font hasn't changed yet because we need CSS to do that. But now, what's going to happen is when you load the page, meaning the browser
We're just gonna copy this. Gonna just do a style just to see if that actually worked or not. Narco one regular. I am pretty sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. Let's just do our span tag. Moment of truth. Hey, there we go. That worked. I'm gonna leave it there. That looks good.
is going to go through the HTML document again. It will go line by line, right? Eventually, it gets to this line, and it will see, oh, there is a link tag here to this URL. Right? This entire thing is called a URL, and it will make a so-called network request to that URL. This is basically an address. And Google, that's a Google server. Google will say, okay, you want the Roboto font. Here you have the Roboto font. So Google's going to send a response, and the browser will receive the response and will see, oh, we received a font, right? So then in our CSS, in a second, we can change the font to Roboto, right? So this is just an example of how to include an external resource. This is a font, but we can also include something else. For example, maybe we want a fav icon, right? You can see here in the tab, we don't have a fav icon right now. We just have this default, globe or whatever it is. But you can see websites typically have like a little picture here, right? So maybe we want that as well. So I have a fav icon here. I'm using this on my website right now on bytegrad.com, but we can use it here as an example. You can copy that from below the video, by the way, if you're coding along, right? So here I could also say link, and now we have to write it out. We have to write it out ourselves. What you can also do is you can write the tag, right? Not with the like these symbols. Only link. That's the tag. And with Emmet, if you then press tab, it will actually give you the complete element, or in this case only the opening tag with the attributes that are typically included here. So you don't have to write it out completely. So here it says. So here we have an opening tag link with two attributes. Rel is a style sheet. That's usually what you want to include, but this time we actually want to make this icon, right? Because this is called a fav icon, right? And then it wants to know where it can find.
Sorry, what? Alright.
So here it says, so here we have an opening tag link with two attributes. Rel is a style sheet. That's usually what you want to include, but this time we actually want to make this icon, right? Because this is called a fav icon,
Oh, is this to change the icon over there? I think it is.
right? And then it wants to know where it can find the icon, so we have to paste the address or the URL in here. You can find that below the video in the description, right? So then if you save this and now refresh, you will see that we now have a
Oh. Um, ROM favicon. Let's see what we get. We need to copy the image address, right? Let's see. Hello, hello. Yeah. Nah, I thought my voice was getting cut off there for a second. Anyhow, let's change this to icon. Put in this link, and did it work? Moment of truth, and it did work. Although it is superb. Uh, yeah, I can make enough of it. Okay, let's just use that.
fav icon, right? So the browser, when you load the page, the browser will go line by line. Eventually, it will see, oh, we need to fetch some icon, right? So it's gonna make a request to this address here, to this URL, and it will receive back that image, right? So it's gonna take that image and it's gonna put it right there, right? So there are other things we can include here, other external resources. For example, a very popular thing to include is some kind of icon set, right? So if you want to use icons, a very popular set is called Font Awesome. right? So maybe we will include that later in one of our projects. But this is typically what you would see as part of the head element as well. All right, now last thing I want to mention actually has to do with the overall structure again. So if we look at the typical website, let's actually look at the projects that we're going to do in this course. So these are really cool projects, and I try to make them as realistic as possible. So what you usually see in the real world is that you have some kind of header at the top of a website, and this includes the logo, maybe some link to the login page, maybe a button, right? Very introductory type of content. And people typically call this a header. And then at the bottom, we have a footer usually, right, with a copyright statement or with these legal links. Right, so this is a very typical structure that you see in most websites where you have a header on top, a footer at the bottom, and then everything else is what we call the dominant content on the page. Right, so really the content, this is what it's all about. Right, so this is what we call the main content. Right, so all of this in between. Right, this is what we would call the main content. If we look at the other project, Evento, you can also see it's very similar. We have a header on the top, right? We have a footer on the bottom, right? And then we have the main content, the dominant content on the page. Right, now there is also a way to make that explicit here in our HTML markup. So for example, we can have the header tag, right? So there's actually a tag with that, the header. There's also, I'm actually just gonna write it right here, right? So we just ignore this for now. We can also have a footer tag, right? So we would put the copyright statement, those legal links in here, right? We would put the logo, those login or sign up links, we would put that in here. And then for the dominant or the main content, we have a main tag, right? So this is also what we're going to use. This is just an example, but this is also very typical in the structure of modern HTML documents. So we are finished with HTML.
I know I've heard of the header and footer tag, but never really used it, except for the header tag, of course. And the main tag also. I don't think I've ever used the main tag, but that might just be me.
Is for the raw information, the actual content that we want to broadcast to the world. But as you could see in what we just coded up, that didn't look so good. So right now, it's not really pleasant to consume that information. So now we're going to use CSS to style that content to make it more pleasant to consume. So these are the 11 most important concepts in my experience that you have to know in CSS. So we're going to look at selectors because with CSS we can style HTML elements, but we have to specify, we have to select the HTML elements that we want to style. So a very important part of CSS is styling text, right? And then we're going to look at the box model. Every element has padding, border, and a margin, right? So every element has that box model. We'll talk about what that means. We're going to look at colors, right? So we're going to use a lot of colors. Now colors come in different shapes. So you can have a hex code, an RGBA code, and there are also some built-in color keywords. So centering is always an important part. This is always something that trips people up. We can use the transform property, as it's called, to rotate elements or to scale them smaller or bigger or to move elements. Now, sometimes when we hover a particular element,
How
for
do
example,
you center a div? I think that was I might be very wrong here, but was that the most upvoted or something question on Stack Overflow? Yeah, I might be completely wrong. Yeah, totally speaking out of memory.
we go over the element with our mouse, we want to do something. Sometimes an element is focused, right? So in a form, for example, when you click on that input, the input becomes focused, and you can have special styles in that case. We're going to look at animations and transitions. We'll talk about the differences between them. So we also have the concept of block level elements and inline level elements. And we actually already saw an example of that. So with a div, for example, if you wrap something in a div, it takes up the entire line. But with a span, it stays inline. So span is what people refer to as an inline level element. And a div is what people refer to as a block level element. We'll talk about the differences. And lastly, we'll talk about the concept of inheritance. We're also going to look at the feature in browsers that you can access by right-clicking and clicking on inspect. That opens up the browser developer tools and it helps us code our HTML and CSS. And secondly, right now in the example that we've coded with HTML, we always had to manually refresh the page whenever we made a change. However, there's also an extension in Visual Studio Code that will automatically refresh the page when you make a change. We'll look at that as well. All right, so how do we actually include CSS here? Let me actually remove this because we don't have a header or footer right now. You could say everything should be in the main, but we'll save that for the actual projects that we're going to do in this course. So how do we actually start writing CSS? Well, we actually have a couple of options. Let's say we want to make this text here, this paragraph, a different color, maybe the color red. So one option you have is to actually go in the opening tag here and use the style attribute, and then you can write CSS in here. So we can have the property color. We can set that to red. So
All right. Where's our paragraph tag? After the H1 tag, yeah, there we go.
if I save here, it's red. Right now, this way is
Does it affect the? Yeah, it affects the. No, I thought we applied it on the header. Anyhow.
not recommended because now we start, tightly coupling the CSS with the HTML, right? Because now the CSS is in the opening tag, and generally speaking, we want to have we want to have a cleaner separation between HTML and CSS. So one other option is what you will see sometimes is that people put it in the head element actually. So we can write style, we can create a style element, and then in here we can write CSS. So now if we want to make the paragraph red again, well now we have to select it. So we can have a selector. Right, so the selector can be the tag name, right? So this is a p tag, so we say p. And then we have opening and closing curly braces, and then in here we can say color red again. Now typically there's also a semicolon after the value here. Right, so if I do this, if I save here, it's still red. Right, if I remove this and save here and refresh, now it's back to normal color again. Right, so this also works.
We gotta
Now, this is
just
what you'll see
made it
sometimes, and it's not necessarily wrong. This is used for certain
as a
optimizations.
default
But generally speaking, we can have an even cleaner separation by putting the CSS into its own file, right? Because right now we're still in the HTML file, but we can also have a CSS file. So let's actually do that. Okay, so we're going to open the sidebar here again. And actually, let me refresh here to show you that's not red anymore, right? We've removed the CSS from here. So in the sidebar here, we're going to create a new file for CSS. So a typical name that you'll see is style.css or styles.css. Let's do that one. You can also call it homepage.css, or you know, if you have styles for one particular page, you can call it whatever you want. As long as the extension is .css, the browser.
I think I'm using that font, not font. What do you call the icon extension on VS Code or something
Will
like that.
understand what to do with that. Okay, so I'm going to close the sidebar
Okay,
again
let's
because it's
go.
taking.
I wonder what is yeah, and okay, and what about uh right?
Too much space. So in here we can write CSS, right? So if we want to make a paragraph red again, remember first we have to select it, because if we say color red, the browser doesn't know, okay, color red, which element should be red? Well, that's what we should select. So we can select by tag, right, P, and then we have the opening and closing curly braces again, press enter. And then in here we can say color red again with a semicolon. All right, so now if we refresh, now it's interesting. Now it's not red. How is this possible? Why
Let's
is it not red?
also import our style, Google font style.
This is a very common
We
mistake.
have not imported
So the
that
problem here
style.
is we have to think about what happens when you load an HTML file or when you load the page, right? So when we load the page, right, or refresh here, load the page, the browser goes through the HTML file, right? So it goes line by line, right? And here it sees, oh, we need to get this icon, right? And here's the address for the icon. So it will get that icon, right? And then it sees, oh, we need to get this style sheet, right, or font, and here's the address, right? And that will continue here. But nowhere here does it see, oh, we need to get this CSS file, right? Because we haven't linked to that in here. We have to make that explicit. So what we can do, let me add some more space here. We can write link, just the tag name, right? If you write just the tag name, Emmet helps us out, because then if you press tab, it will give you the complete link element. And it asks us, where can we find this style sheet? Well, it's in the same folder. So what you can just write is styles.css. Right, so if you do that and save that, and
And
now
that did not work. Maybe this is not saved. Yeah, there we go. Now it worked.
refresh, now it's working again, right? So now these styles are applied to the HTML, right? So that's how you can include CSS in your HTML. Okay, let's talk about selectors in CSS. So here we've used a tag selector, meaning we have specified the element that we want to style by its tag name, which is P in this case, right? We can also make this H1, right? If we do this, it will get the H1 element, or actually it will get all elements that you specify here, right? So if you use P, it will select all elements that have the tag P, right? So right now we only have one paragraph element, but if we have another one, right, if I duplicate this, right here we have two. They're both red, right? That's how you can select by tag. We can also select by ID. This was pretty popular back in the day. So what we can do is, for example, if we want to style
What do you mean by back in the day? It's still popular now.
this H1, we can give this an ID. We can say ID is heading. Right? If you're coding along with me, make sure you save the file. So now if we want to select this by ID, you can use the you should use the hashtag, and then it's heading. And if you save there and refresh, that also works. Right? So you can select by ID. This was pretty popular back in the day. You would see this more often. However, these days, you know, people generally select by class. So instead of ID,
Ah, is that real? Oh, we have why is my chat hidden number here? View, how can I view this chat? Apparently I can't, but hey, I have to look at my wanderer, Stella, right? Stella Info. I'm doing good. What about you? How are you? Just doing a refresher course on our HTML and CSS here. Ah, by the way, what was I curious about? Yeah, is that true? Like, I think both IDs and class are used. I mean, yeah, class are used much more, but IDs are not like forgotten. They're not, in the Internet Explorer stage right now. Okay, yeah.
we write class here. So the idea of ID is that it's unique, right? So you shouldn't use the same ID for multiple elements. However, with class, you can use the same name for multiple elements. So we can say heading, And now, because it's a class, we don't use the hashtag, but we use a dot. Right, refresh, it's still red. Right? So those are really the three main selectors that you will see. Now we can make this more complicated, and I don't want to get too crazy right now, but just to give you an example, what we can also say is, for example, we want to select an element with a class of heading that is sitting in a div. Right? So we can make the selector this. This means select an element with a class of heading that is a so-called child element of a div element. Right? So you can also see this as the parent element. This div is the parent, and in here, these are the child elements. Right? So this is an element with a class of heading.
Oh,
And it's
and
also a
that
child
work doesn't have a paragraph inside a div. I mean, heading inside a. Oh, because I have not changed this to class. That should work now. Wow, why didn't that work? Div dot heading. Maybe I did not save this. Hmm. Interesting. So we haven't. Oh, it should be the. Why am I making such a silly mistake? Everything is there.
element of this div. Right? So sometimes you'll see these more complicated selectors. Now we'll talk more about these complicated selectors in the intermediate div. In here, these are the child elements. Right? So this is an element with a class of heading, and it's also a child element of this div. Right? So sometimes you'll see these more complicated selectors. Now we'll talk more about these complicated selectors in the intermediate section. It's not really important right
Maybe a space that. Hmm, I don't know that
now,
one.
but these selectors can become more complicated.
Learn
Okay, so
something
so far we've
every
been using
day.
this color property. Right? So this is called a property. This is the value for that property, and this entire thing is called a declaration. You don't have to memorize that, but let's talk about some font property value for the can
Wait,
become
what's
selectors. Now we'll
the
talk more about these complicated selectors in the intermediate section. It's not really important right now, but
thing
these
called?
selectors can become more complicated. Okay, so far we've been using this color property. Right? So this is called a property. This is the value for that property, and this. Okay, so far we've been using this color property. Right? So this is called a property. This is the value for that property, and this entire thing is called a declaration. You don't have to memorize that, but
Okay.
let's talk about some font properties.
That's good.
So this heading, we don't really want to make it red, right? So let's actually undo that. So this heading here, maybe we think, well, it's a little bit too big, right? Or maybe it's not big enough. Right? Maybe we want to make it even bigger. So we can say font size is 100 pixels, right? So we use the unit pixels in CSS. And if we do that,
Always wondered how pixel to centimeter. 1 pixel is this much centimeter. So 100 pixels should be what that 2.6 centimeters. If I had a scale, I would have measured it. Oh, you know what? Actually, okay, let's see. Well, yeah, this is not a scale, but let's. I hope I don't damage my screen. I mean, I won't put it up close. And what is this? Is this centimeters or? Yeah, provided the lower end part of this is a centimeter, it's somewhere between 2 and 3. That might be a coincidence, but I think it's right there. Yeah,
you can see now it's huge.
that was
Right,
a
so font
fun
size now it's a little bit too big. Let's make it
experiment.
50. Right, so we have font size. We have color. Right, so we've seen color already, but color is actually used for the font. Right, so
Have another big up. That's
it's actually not font
that's
color, which actually makes it a
a
little bit
cool
confusing because you would
color.
think it would be font color, but in CSS we simply call it color, right? But this is actually used for text, right? And we've already seen that. So okay, let's talk about selectors in CSS. So here we've used a tag selector, meaning this was pretty clear. Hashtag, but you get 100 pixels. That go through the font family and pick one. Actually change this to a different color. The Roboto font. Well, important one is right, but actually not. We have color, right? So we've seen color already, but color is actually used for the font, right? So it's actually not font color. which actually makes it a little bit confusing because you would think it would be font color, but in CSS we simply call it color, right? But this is actually
One
usually
of
the font,
those quirks
right? And we've already seen that. So
CSS thing that
another well, important one is what if we want to change the font, right? So remember we are linking to a different font here, the Roboto font, right? So now we actually want to use that font. How do we do that? Well, let's actually change this to a different color that doesn't look so horrible. We'll talk more about colors, but there are built-in colors, so you can go through them and pick one that you like. I'll take this dark olive green. So if we want to set it to the Roboto font, we can say font family.
If you're a web designer, here are 4 Wix Studio features you gotta know.
And here we can say Roboto, right? And then typically what you also see is a comma and then a backup. So in case the Roboto font is not available, we tell the browser pick any sans serif font. Right, so serif means when they have like a bit of a curl at the end, at the edges.
I'll choose.
Right, so usually you don't want that. It's a bit of a stylistic type of font. Usually you don't want that curl or curly type of look. So you want
Wait, what?
to see is a comma and then a backup. So in case the Roboto font is not available, we tell the browser pick any sans serif font. Right, so serif means when they have like a bit of a curl at the end, at the edges. Right, so usually you don't want that. It's a bit of a stylistic type of font. Usually you don't want that curl or curly type of look. So you want to have a sans serif font. Because maybe the server is not working, right? So the Roboto is not available. So then we say, well, pick any sans serif font. But now you can see the font has changed, and I think this already looks much better, right? So these are the most important font properties. Okay, let's talk about the box model in CSS, a very important concept.
Although I did not choose.
So every HTML element has
Oh, robot
a
yeah.
box model. So every element takes up some space.
Oh, it's called Narco one. Narco one. There we go. The previous one did look better, so I'm just gonna. You can actually do robot too, and then.
So what I've selected here, that's the actual space that the content of this heading takes up. Now directly
Let's
outside
keep
there,
it there for
we will
now.
have
I know
padding.
it might not be using robot since we did not import it, but let's just keep it as it is.
Around the padding, there will be a border if we want a border. And if we want something out there, that's called margin. Right, so let's actually go through an example here. I'm going to make the font a little bit smaller here, 30 pixels. Okay, so now we can add, for example, padding. So we can say padding on the top, right, on the top of this element, on the right side, or at the bottom, or on the left side. Let's say we think it's sitting a little bit too close to the edge here, so we can say padding on the left side of, let's say, 20 pixels. Right, so now you can see there's more space, right, which pushes the actual content of this element to the right a little bit. Right, so you can also have padding on the top, or on the bottom, or on the right side. Okay, now we can also have a border. So we can have border, and this could be like 2 pixels, right, so how thick the border should be, 2 pixels wide. And we can have a dashed border, but usually you want a solid border. And then the color of the border, well, we can just write black, right? The word black, well, it's actually built in color, so we can write it like that. Right, so now you can see there is a border. And you can see
Why is my border? Okay.
that this border here does not sit directly against the content here. And let's actually make the padding a little bit bigger so it's even more clear. So if we make this 50 pixels, yeah, so you can see the space from the content to the border is 50 pixels, right? So here's where we have padding. Now what if we right, and the space here, by the way, from here to that's simply because it just wrapped onto a new line. So I'm gonna make it even bigger so it's even clearer. Yeah, so now the space from the border to the actual content of this element is 100 pixels. That's padding. Padding sits directly around the content, and then around the padding is where we have the border, right? Now what if we want space between the border and the edge here, because we think maybe the border is sitting too close to the edge? Well, then we have margin, so we can also have margin on the left. Let's make it 30 pixels. Right, so now we have even more space here. So this is margin, right? So don't worry if you're confused by this. Well, then we have margin, so we can also have margin on the left. Let's make it 30 pixels.
Yeah.
Right, so now we have even more space here. So this is margin, right? So don't worry if you're confused by this. This is something that you're gonna have to practice with, and we'll do that, of course, in the project. But we have the actual content. Around the content is padding. Then we have a border, and then we have margin. That's the box model, and every element has that. All right. So at this point, I also want to show you the inspect feature. So what you can do is you can right-click and you can click on inspect, and that will open up. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger. Let's see if that works.
Let's
I can
just
make it bigger like this.
out the inspect tools.
So let's see. Yeah. Okay, so this is called the developer tools. So what we see here, if you click on elements, we see an overview of the HTML on the page. And if you go through here with your mouse, you will see the different elements that you have that you are hovering here with your mouse. So for example, I can open this up, and here we have our heading, right? Now you can see the size that the heading takes up on the page if you hover it. So you see that orange color, a green color, and a blue color. And then below here, we see the styles for this element, right? So you can see here the heading has these properties, right? So here we have an overview of the HTML basically, and then below here we have an overview of the styles, the CSS that's applied to those elements. right? And sometimes what happens is, you set a particular style and it's not working, right? Or something is wrong. So you can open the developer tools and you can double check whether those styles are actually applied to that element. Now, what's also interesting here is they actually show you the box model, right? So here, you can see this is the size that the actual content takes up, right? Then directly outside of there, we have padding, right? We don't have padding on the top, on the right, or on the bottom, but only on the left, right? You can also see it on the page. It shows you the green color. Around the padding, we have a border, right? Border is only 2 pixels thick. And around the border, we actually have margin. Right, now we have set 30 pixels of margin on the left, but it also has margin on the top and bottom for some reason. And that is actually default styling coming from the browser, right? So when you create an H1 element, the browser knows, oh, it needs some space to breathe. So it will actually already give some margin on the top and bottom. And you can remove that if you want, but that's how the box model, at least for this particular element right now, is.
Wait, what?
You can open the developer tools and you can double check whether those styles are actually applied to that element. Now, what's also interesting here is they actually show you the box model, right? So here, you can see this is the size that the actual content takes up, right? Then directly outside of there, we have padding, right? We don't have padding on the top, on the right, or on the bottom, but only on the left, right? You can also see it on the page. It shows you the green color. Around the padding, we have a border, right? Border is only 2 pixels thick. And around the border, we actually have margin. Right, now we have set 30 pixels of margin on the left, but it also has margin on the top and bottom for some reason. And that is actually default styling coming from the browser, right? So when you create an H1 element, the browser knows, oh, it needs some space to breathe. So it will actually already give some margin on the top and bottom. And you can remove that if you want, but that's how the box model, at least for this particular element right now, is structured. Right, and every element has this. So if we go to this paragraph element that we have, it's the same story. It has some actual content. Right? This comes from the font, right? So the font actually takes up some space. Now it doesn't have any padding, it doesn't have any border, but it does have margin on the top and bottom. And this is also coming from the browser, right? So the browser automatically adds some margin on the top and bottom for paragraph elements. Right? So every element, you can think of it, every element has sort of like a rectangular shape, right? And that consists of these three things: padding, border, and margin. All right, let me close out of here, and let's actually talk about colors. So here I've used a built-in color. So for example, if you type a particular character, you can see that some of these words, they represent a particular color. Right, and you can use that. And let me actually remove the padding and border and margin as well, because it doesn't look so good. Right, so you can use these built-in colors. There's a lot of them, and if you write a letter, you can.
How was comment and CSS look like? And was it too? Nah, it's yeah.
Now, typically, we use hex codes. So, for example, if I want a black color, the hex code for that, it consists of 6 characters. It's just 6 zeros, and it's black. Right. If you hover that with your mouse in Visual Studio Code, you can also pick a color and it shows you the hex code. Right. A popular trick is to pick like a blue here, and then go towards the darker at the bottom here, almost black, but just enough to have a little bit of blue. And now it looks black, but generally speaking, if you put in a little bit of blue, that will make it look a little bit better. And we'll see better examples of this, but you can see that.
Huh. That's a neat front-end trick I didn't know about. The shade of blue and then almost black, but not. Let's see if this is different. To be frank, I don't see much of a difference. Maybe it's me not knowing much about aesthetics. Yeah.
This is the hex code for this particular color. Right, now we also have RGBA or RGB, right? So you can say a number between 0 and 255 for red, green, and blue, right? And you will get a similar result. Now what's more interesting is RGBA, because then we can also work with opacity. Right, so if we want a black color, for example, I would have 0 for red, 0 for green, 0 for blue. And then the fourth value here would be the opacity. So we can say, for example, 0.5 opacity, which means 50% opacity. Right, and now you can see it looks green, but it's basically black, and it's just a little bit see-through. Right, so these are the typical color formats that we'll use. We also have the concept of block level elements and inline level elements. So most of these elements that you see here are block level elements, meaning they take up their own line, right? They take up the entire line. However, some elements, for example, this input here and this button here, they can sit in line with other elements. Right, so for example, in the form here, we have input and a button. So we can try making this input a block level element. So let's actually try selecting this. So let's give it a class, because this is typically how people do it in practice. We could also use its tag, right? But it's just not something people do in practice for multiple reasons. So let's give it a class, and we can simply call. So we can try making this input a block level element. So let's actually try selecting this. So let's give it a class, because this is typically how people do it in practice. We could also use its tag, right? But it's just not something people do in practice for multiple.
You can also use what?
This. So let's give it a class, because this is typically how people do it in practice. We could also use its tag, right? But it's just not something people do in practice. Try selecting this. So let's give it a class, because this is typically how people do it in practice. We could also use its tag, right?
You could also use its tag.
But it's just not something people do in practice.
Oh, I see. We can we can use the input a tag as the selector
for multiple reasons. So let's give it a class, and we can simply call it input.
Right, okay. Call it input.
Right, so there's a certain benefit of consistently using classes, especially as your project becomes bigger. Right, so this may look a little bit strange, but we give it a class of input, right? And now we want to select it, right? So we have to use the dot input, because it's a class, right? If we were selecting by tag, you can simply write input. If you are selecting by ID, you use the hashtag. Here we use class, so we have to use the dot. right? So right now, its default setting, right? So we use the display property for this, is inline, right? So if I would do this, nothing would change because this is already the default.
Alright, let's
However, if we
change
make this
it
block,
to block.
let's see
What
what
is
happens.
inline block? Okay, what is inline block? Okay, the major difference is that inline block allows to set a width and height on the element. Okay,
Happens. So now at the bottom
that
here, you can
answers
see
it.
it kicked off the button, right? So now this input here is taking up the entire line, right? So that's a block level element. And yeah, you sometimes there are certain situations where you want to change that, right? And this is actually already the default, so we don't even need this. Okay, let's talk about centering in CSS. This is a topic that comes up pretty often, and we'll practice with this a lot. So the two ways of centering that I want to show you right now are the following. So let's say that we have this paragraph here, right? We want to put that in the center, right, horizontally on the page. So let's actually select that paragraph. And let me actually remove this here because we don't need this for now. I'm just going to call it text. You can call it whatever you want, by the way. There's no strict rule on how you should call your class names, but typically you want to have like a descriptive name. Right, so we have to select it. And then one common way of centering here is with text align. So we can say text align center. If I save here and refresh, you can see it sits in the center now, right? So this is very common, but this does not always work. So sometimes you want to use a different way. So let's say we also want to center this image. Right, let's look at the image. Let's give it a class. We can simply call it image, img. And what I like to do, the image comes before the text, right? So I also like to keep the selectors in that order. It's not mandatory, but it helps with my mental map of how everything is structured, right? So we select by class, so we use .img. So now if you would try text align center, that doesn't work for the image, right? The image does not sit in the center, right? So one of the reasons for this is because the image is also an inline level element, and its width right now is restricted. So one other thing.
So we need to make it that work.
Thing we can do is we can make it a block level element. So we can say block. Now it's a block level element. That doesn't change much here. But now if we do the following, we can say margin on the left, right? So we could say something like 50 pixels, and it would push itself to that by 50 pixels, right? And we can also say margin on the right of, I don't know, 100 pixels. Right? So this is a bit silly. My point being is we have these two properties, margin left and margin right. And if we set that to the same size, we could set 50 pixels, for example, but depending on how wide your browser window is, that will not work. So one other trick here is to use auto. So if you have auto margin on the left side and on the right side, well, there's going to be equal space on both sides. So that will center the image.
Oh, okay.
Right, but you have to make it a block level element in order to make it work. Right, but now you can see it's sitting nicely in the center.
That's what you use auto for, huh?
Right, so text align center and this margin auto trick with, well, sometimes it already is a block level element. However, an image is an inline level element. So first we have to convert it to a block level element, and then you can do this, right? Don't worry, this is a little bit confusing. We'll practice with this in the project. All right, next I want to take a look at the transform property. So let's actually use the button for this example. So let's go to the button here. Let's give it a class. Typical class for a button is btn. So then here we can have .btn. So we have the transform property. So with this property, you can rotate elements. So you can say rotate and then a number of degrees, right? So you can say 50 deg, degree, and you've rotated it, right? We can also scale.
See that work? That works out, right?
This element up or down. For example, we can make it 3 times as big. And that's very big. We can also make it smaller, 0.5, right? So 1 is normal. Right, so 0.5 is half its size.
Smaller.
And 1 is normal size, right? We can also move this element with translate. So we can move it horizontally or vertically. So we can say horizontally it's translate x. We can say move this element by 200 pixels.
So we can scale it. We can how do you rotate it again? Yeah, you just use rotate and use degree. We can also
This means to the right.
move it around.
Right, so it moves it. We can say move this element by 200 pixels. This means to the right. Right, so it moves it 200 pixels to the right.
So let me guess. Negative 200 would move it to the left. Yep, it moves it to the left. Alright.
We can also move it to the left, right? Maybe right. So 0 pixels is its normal position, right? And now we can make it sit more to the left with a negative number, right? So then it will go to the left. So -3 pixels Yeah, well, it's very close, but you can see it moved a little bit to that way, right? -10. Right now it's sitting there. Right, so then it escapes the page basically. But yeah, that's the transform property. All right, so now I want to talk about the hover and focus states of an element. And I actually want to use the button as an example for that. So let's actually also try to center the button here. So what we can do is we can make it a block level element. We say display block. And now we can use margin auto, margin left auto, margin right auto. Right, so now this is sitting in the center. Okay, so now let's say that when we hover the button,
okay, but he did that for the book now. But what happens if we do it for our submit button? Without the reply, it would look like that. Moves it to the next line, and then display moves it to the next line. And this applies the margin, moves it here. Yeah, there we go. Although let's apply the button class not on this button but rather the book now button. Yeah.
we want to, well, scale the button bigger, right? So what you can do is you can say .btn again, but now we are going to select the element in the hover state, meaning when you go over it with your mouse. Right, so in this state, we want to do transform scale, let's say 2, right? Now if we refresh, and now when you go over there with your mouse, it becomes bigger, right? And you can do all sorts of things here, right? So this is the hover state. Now we also have an input here. The input,
Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Good.
actually we remove the class. Let's quickly give it a class again of input, right? And then here we can say dot in. Actually we remove the class. Let's quickly give it a class again of input, right? And then here we can say dot.
What are we gonna do again? We're gonna give this a class. We already
Actually we remove the class. Let's quickly give it a class again of input, right? And then here we can say dot input in the hover state, or actually the focus state. That's another one, right? So when we click on this, this is actually focused, and we can also do something in that case. Maybe maybe we want to make it, maybe we want to move, right? Or maybe we want to make it bigger as well. So we can actually just copy this. And so now when I click on the input, it becomes bigger, right? Of course, this doesn't look very good, but this is just an example of the focus state. Now the most common one though is the hover state.
that didn't change it though. Oh, never mind. Yeah, that doesn't look good.
Right, so you can imagine there's a lot of these, right? So if you hover pretty much any button, you want to have some kind of styling specifically for that state. And right now, this is not very smooth, right? So that's what we'll look at next, how to make it smooth. All right, so it's not smooth right now, right? It happens in
We use the time thing, right? Although I forgot what the what's it? The property name for that is.
instantly. Right? So as soon as I hover it, the transform property here is set to scale 2. Now we want it to be smooth. And the way to do this is with a so-called transition. So you
Yeah,
go to the normal
transition. There we
selector,
go.
and here you can say transition. So basically here what we can specify is that if the transform property gets changed, we can specify how long it should take to go to that new setting. Right, so here it's going to ask us, well, for which property is this transition? Well, for the transform property. And we can say if this gets changed, it should happen in like 0.4 seconds. Right, so if I do this and refresh, and now you can see this is much smoother. Right, and we can do
Oh, because I misspelled transform. Okay. Okay, there you go.
other things in the hover, by the way. A typical one is to also set the cursor to pointer. Right, so to really indicate that the user can click on it. Right, so that's a transition. You use it in the normal, in the rule set. This entire thing is called a rule set, without any hover or focus selector. Right, so just the normal selector. Okay, so that's a transition. Now we also have the concept of animation in CSS. So the way that works is with so-called keyframes. So this is more complicated than just a simple transition, but it's also more powerful. So if we go to the top here,
Right.
it doesn't have to be at the top, but I like to specify this at the top. We can say add keyframes, and then the name of the keyframes. The keyframes are basically the steps of an animation. Right, that's what we're defining here, the steps of an animation. So we can call that fade in. And the steps of an animation, well, we can say at 0%, the opacity, that's a property, for example, should be 0, right? And at the end of the animation, at 100%, the opacity should be 1.
Huh. That's how you define an animation in CSS, huh?
On 100%. right? So these are the steps, and it looks a bit strange here with add keyframes, but that's simply how it's done in CSS. So these are the steps, and if you do refresh here, nothing happens because, well, we've only defined the steps. We haven't applied the steps to any element yet, right? So if we do it for the heading, for example, we can use the animation property, and here we can say, well, here's going to ask us, okay, so you want an animation, so which steps do you want to use for this animation? Well, we call this fade in, so we can say fade in, and then the second value here is how long the animation should take. So we can make that, for example, 1 second, right? So this is an animation, so let's now refresh. Now you can see this heading here nicely fades in about a second, right? So it starts off with opacity 0, and during 1 second, it goes to opacity 1, right? And we can reuse this, right? So these steps, they are their own thing. So now we can copy this, and we can do the same for the image, for example, right? The steps are still the same, and let's also say we want it to take 1 second. Right, so now also the image fades in, right? So that looks pretty cool. And we'll practice a lot with these animations and transitions. All right, so almost finished here. One of the last things I want to mention is inheritance. So right now we have given this heading a font family of Roboto, right? So this heading now has a particular font. And this font is actually what we want to use, of course, for other elements as well, right? So also for this H2, for example, right? Also for this, the list here, right? Also for this paragraph here, right? Everywhere. We want to use this everywhere on our page. So do we have to copy this font family? And do we have to go to, this paragraph and this text here, right? So do we have to do this? Right now, this is also Roboto, right? So this works. We could do this, but it's a lot of work if we have to do that for every, text type of element. So luckily we have the concept of inheritance. So we don't have to do this. I'm going to remove this. So what you can do, remember HTML is like a tree of elements, and we have parent elements and child elements. So what you can do, for example, is we can actually select the body element, right? We could give it a class, but if you're selecting the body element or even the HTML element, I like to just select it by tag. And let's put it at the top here, right? So I can say body, and here I can set the font family, right? So I just pasted it here. I can
Oh, we've already done that, didn't we?
now also remove it from the heading here, right? So we're only setting the font family on this body element.
Oh, okay, I see what you did there.
Right? And the cool thing is, if we do this, also remove it from the heading here, right? So we're only setting the font family on this body element, right? And the cool thing is, if we do this and save here, you can see all the other text now also has Roboto, even though we did not select all of these elements individually and set the font family individually for all of them.
Uh, Roboto and oh, maybe I have Roboto by default. Maybe I have it already.
They are actually
Yeah.
inheriting it from the body. So you only have to specify it in one place, and all the child elements basically will inherit that. Right? So this is the concept of inheritance, and this is very handy because imagine if you had to do it for all of these elements individually. Right? So don't do that. Just set it on a parent element somewhere higher up in the HTML tree, and they will inherit that. All right. So last thing I want to mention before we start doing an actual project is something that helps us with our workflow here. So every time we make a change, we have to go here, we have to refresh, right? And that's a major hassle. Imagine you're developing a serious project and you have to do it for every little change. So luckily, we have something called extensions in Visual Studio Code. So if you click on this icon here, I already have some extensions installed. But if you're completely new, a helpful extension may be the live server extension. Right, so if you search for live server, it's the first one here by Ritwik Day. And let me actually make this full screen if my computer allows me to do this. Yeah. So it's a very popular one. It's been downloaded, millions of times, and this will make it very easy for us to, update the page, right? So because every time we make a change, it will automatically refresh for us. Now my computer, for some reason, I think it's because I'm recording here. It's not a very powerful computer I'm on, but I already have it installed, right? So you're going to see something like install, right? So you can click on the install button, and maybe you have to relaunch Visual Studio Code. And actually, let me just go through that. Reload required. Okay, I will do that. Right, so now it's gone from my list of extensions. So I go to live server. Right, so it'll say install. Okay, I click on install. Okay, so now I don't even have to reload here. Maybe you do, but it will.
I did open it up in Edge though. I think I need to change the default browser. Anyhow, that should take place effect now. Let's remove this.
It will show you that. Okay, now once you have installed this, we can go out of here. We can click this away. So now we want to open our project with that live server extension. Now you're gonna see eventually here at the bottom, you're gonna see something like go live. For me, it doesn't show this right now. Yeah, so here it shows go live. You can click on that, and it will automatically find the HTML file in the folder that you're working in, and it will open it up on a so-called live server. You don't really have to understand what that means. Another thing you can do, or alternatively, you can use right-click. You can click open with live server. Right, so make sure you have the HTML file, and then open with live server. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna click on this.
DevOps, SRE, Cloud, and Platform Engineer. How well do you understand these roles?
And it will open this up in a new window here. And you can see the address right now is completely different. So I'm going to copy this address. And I'm going to open this up in the old window that we have here. Right, let me actually make it a little bit bigger. Right, so now it looks the same, but the address here, URL, is different. But now what we have gained from doing this, let me close out of here. Now if I change something, for example, if I remove, or actually let me take the heading here. If I remove, just something random here. If I remove this part of the heading, book your, I remove this. Just Rome guide here, right? So if I save here, I didn't even refresh, and automatically.
There you go. That couldn't get
automatically
it.
refreshed for us, right? So the change is automatically reflected here in the browser, right? So the same goes for CSS, by the way, right? So for example, if we have this font size here for the heading, if I set that to 60 pixels, right? And now I'm going to save. As soon as I save, you can see it automatically refreshes the page, right? So that's a very handy extension, and that's also what we're going to use in the project. All right, now there are some smaller things in HTML and CSS, and we could spend hours discussing all the little details, but the best way to learn is actually building a project from scratch, step by step, and that's exactly what we're going to do in the next section. So I'll see you there. All right, welcome to project 1. This project is called Evento. And in this project, we're going to bring all of those HTML and CSS fundamentals into practice, right? So imagine that someone, comes up to you and they tell you, hey, I need a website where people can find and book events. So maybe you designed this or someone else designed this, and now it's up to us to take design and bring it into code in HTML and CSS.
I'm gonna take a break for like maybe 5 or maybe 10 minutes, and I'll be back. We'll start with this uh and man, is it? Oh, evento project. That's what we're gonna call it. Yep. All right. It's let me switch my overlay. I'll be right back. Alright, did my stream miss me? I am back. Alright. Uh, why is my camera always disoriented when I come back? No, that's slanted. That looks good enough. We'll keep it as it is. Let's just readjust our mic and yeah, let's get back to it again. Again, my camera is landed in it. Nope, nope, nope. Oops, not, not. Let's readjust this thing. You know what? That looks good enough, even though it's a bit slanted. So let's just continue. All right.
CSS
So
code.
yeah,
So that's
we're
exactly what we're
about
going to do.
to
So it
get
starts off with pretty
started
cool
with
intro
making
animations. We'll
this
talk all about that.
project.
So add the time to code. So maybe you designed this or someone else designed this, and now it's up to us to take design and bring it into code in HTML and CSS code. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So it starts off with pretty cool intro animations. We'll talk all about that. So at the top we have this header, right? And for the logo we're just going to write evento, right? So just text, right? So this is still a pretty simple project, but we're going to create it from scratch, step by step, and you'll see all of these fundamentals in practice. So then in the header we also have these links, right? So if you hover them, they have a very subtle transition. And then we have the main part here, the most important content. So we have a heading, we have a paragraph here, right? The evento here is a little bit bolder than the rest of the text. And then we have this form with an input and a button. If you click on the input here, it becomes a little bit whiter, right? Lighter, right? Also, if you hover the button, it slightly changes its color, right? These are all very subtle transitions. And at the bottom, we have a footer. All right, that's what we're gonna do in this section. Okay, so I have opened up my code editor again, and the first step is to open a folder. So I'm gonna create a new folder actually,
Exactly what we're about to do.
and I'm gonna call that folder evento-project, and then I'm gonna open it up here, right? Then in here, we're gonna put the files, and any website, no matter how complicated they may seem, it all starts with HTML. So the first file that we're gonna create here is an HTML file. The typical name is index.html.
Hmm. How should we do it though? I don't want to create an entirely different. Just create a folder inside this. Oh, even our folder has icon. Let's call it. Yeah, let's call it Evento.
And I'm gonna close the sidebar for now, just so we have a little bit more space. So let's start with the overall structure. So what you can do is you can type HTML, and then Emmet gives us some suggestions here, and we want the second suggestion. And if you then press
And we'll put these two in the tutorial. Maybe getting started is the better word.
tab,
I'll
it will give you this
just
HTML boilerplate, right? So we don't have to type out this entire structure every time. So I like to add some space here, right, to separate the meta tags from the title. And let's change the type, right? Whoops, HTML. Close the sidebar for now, just so we have a little bit more space. So let's start with the overall structure. So what you can do is you can type HTML, and then Emmet gives us some suggestions here, and we want the second suggestion. And if you then press tab, it will give you this HTML boilerplate, right? So we don't have to type out this entire structure every time. So I like to add some space here, right, to separate the meta tags from the title. And let's change the title to evento events anywhere. Okay, and let's also add some text here, blah, blah, to the body. And let's try to open this up in the browser to see if this works. So I'm going to save here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And to open this up, you can click and drag this onto the top part of your browser. And
I think we need to change this to Evento slash. There we go.
indeed, we see our page here, right? So we see the title. Let me actually make this a little bit bigger. I can see blah, blah here and the title. All right, so that's working now. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so we're going to need a couple of things in this project. We're going to need a different font and also a fav icon. So these are external resources. So let's actually start there. I'm going to add some space here by pressing enter. And let's actually start with the fav icon. So if you just write link, like just the tag name, link, and then press tab, it will actually create the entire element for you. It has no closing tag. So here it says relationship is a style sheet. Well, no, it's actually an icon. And then the link to that icon, you can find that in the description.
That
So just copy
good,
that and you can paste it right here. Right, so if we save here and go back, now we have our fav icon.
Although I don't have that. You know what? Our icon is gonna be there we go. Yeah, this is gonna be an icon. Or maybe the red one, it looks more cooler. So yeah, let's copy the image address and that should do it.
Icon. So the second thing we're going to need is a different font. So if you look at the example, you can see this is not the default font. This is actually the Lato font. And I also found this on Google Fonts. So we can write link again and press tab. And it is indeed style sheet, right? That's how fonts are treated. That's how it works with Google Fonts at least. And now you can copy the link from the description again.
But the links are all copy paste. Okay, gotcha. There we go. So, oh, in fact, in that case, let's replace the guitar with our window icon. Right, that worked. And here we have our font URL. Control C is what I need to do. Not paste that in there.
Welcome to the number one HTML and CSS link. Right, just the tag name, link, and then press tab. It will actually create the entire element for you. It has no closing tag. So here it says relationship is a style sheet. Well, no, it's actually an icon. And then the link to that icon, you can find that in the description. Right, so just copy that. And you can paste it right here. Right, so if we save here and go back, font, this is, and it is indeed style sheet, right? That's how fonts are treated. That's how it works with Google Fonts at least. And now you can copy the link from the description again. Right, so just copy that and paste it right here. Okay, so I'm going to save here. And of course, nothing will happen yet because if we want to use that font, well, that's what we're going to have to do with CSS as well, right? And let me make this, oh no, that's a fine size. Okay, so what else do we need? Well, we're going to write CSS, right? And ideally, we can write CSS in its own file. So let's actually create a separate CSS file. You can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call it styles.css. This is a common name. As long as the extension is .css, you can give it any name you want. I'm going to close the sidebar here again. Now remember, this will not work if we do not link to it in our HTML because the HTML file is the first thing that the browser will receive, right? So it will go line by line. Here it sees, oh, we need to get this fav icon. Oh, we need to get this style sheet. And then here, what we want is that we link to our own style sheet. So we can say link again and press tab. And now we want to link to our own style sheet. Since it's in the same folder, we can simply say styles.css. Okay, so then in the CSS here, we can start off with some base styles. So if we look at the example, there's a background image, right? So we'll see how that works in CSS. And we can implement the font and maybe the default color for the font on the page, right? So that will work with inheritance, right? So what we can say here is we can select the body element, right? The body here is an element like any other element that we've seen. We can select it by tag. We could also give it a class, but with body and also the HTML element, I like to just select by its tag name. The class is not really necessary.
Yeah.
So what we can say here is, for example, font family. And this is the font that we just linked to, which is Lato, right? And then if Lato is not available for whatever reason, maybe the Google server is down, right? So then you have a comma and then you have a backup. Then we can say pick any sans serif font, right? We can also say the color on the page, the default color should be white. The white has a hex code of FFF, so 6 times F. Now the thing with hex codes is if the last 3 are the same as the first 3, you can leave off the last 3.
Huh. Is that true? I didn't know that.
Right, so this is what you will see in practice quite often. All right, and then let's try doing the background image. So there's actually a property called background image, right? And we want to use an image here, and it has a certain URL. So we say URL, and I'll put a semicolon there at the end. And then here in the parentheses, I will have quotation marks. These can be singular or double quotation marks. They are treated the
Alright, and let's copy. I believe this would be the
same.
background
And then you can find the link for
URL.
this background image in the description below the video. So you can just copy that and paste it right here, right? So let's see if that works. Let's see what we get. All right, so now we get this background image. Now it's not sized properly, but we'll work on that. And let me actually remove this blah blah. I'm going to remove blah blah here. And I'm going to refresh. Now remember, whenever we make a change, we have to refresh. That's a lot of work. That's very annoying. So ideally, we can use that live server extension, and that's what we're going to do now. So what you can do is you can open up this sidebar here. You can right click on the HTML file, and you can click on open with live server. Right? You can also click on go live here at the bottom of the code editor. I'm going to do this, and it will open it up in a new window. But I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it right here. And let me make it a little bit bigger. Oh, no, this is fine, I think. Okay, so if you've done that, let's actually double check if everything looks the same. So I'm going to make this full screen.
That looks good enough.
All right, so here, yeah, so here, if we compare this, so this image here is sitting a little bit higher up than here. So what we can do with background images, let me close the sidebar again, is we can move them up or down, right? So what we can say, so the property here that we can use is background position. And we can change it horizontally or vertically. We want to do vertically. And we want to move it upwards, so it's actually a negative number. Right, so by 150 pixels. So if you save that, it will move upwards a little bit. Or at least it should do that. And actually, we have live server, so I don't even need to refresh here. Right, so now it moved up by 150 pixels. And let me actually prove this to you. So if I remove this, and now I look at the project, I'm going to save here in a second. So now if I save, yeah, so now it's lower again, right? So if I do this and save, it goes up, yeah. Okay, now this image here is very light, Right, so if you look at the example, it's a bit darker, right, because it's a background image. And this is one of those design tips and tricks that I can already give you, is when you work with images and you have text on top of the image, that's usually a problem because the text becomes difficult to read. There are all sorts of tricks that you can use to make the text more readable, but one of the most easy ones is simply to make the image darker. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, we can also have a background color. So we can say background color, right? We can simply make this not completely dark. We're actually going to use RGBA because we don't want completely dark. We want like a dark overlay, but with like 50% opacity, right? So the RGBA code for that, so we have 0 for red, green, and blue, and then for the opacity, it's 0.5. Right, so we want like a 0.5, 50% dark overlay on top of the image. Right, that's what we will get with background color. Now, if you do this, that won't happen yet because then we want to blend this color with the image. So we also have background blend mode. Right, because now we have an image and a color for the background. The browser doesn't know exactly how they need to go together. So we're going to tell the browser blend these two together in a darkening manner. Right, so if you do that, you can see it becomes dark, and so with white.
Okay, this is the first time that I'm seeing this property background blend.
Text that's going to look very legible. All right, so let's see what else we can do. How about we continue with the header here? So the header has sort of a logo, but we're just going to type out this text, and then it has these links. Right, so imagine that if you click on this, you go to the concerts page, or if you click on this, you go to the sports page. Right, so these links in the header, they usually have a typical structure, as we'll see. Right, so let's go to our HTML. And here in the body, now we're actually going to add some content, right? So remember, I showed you that typically these websites have a certain structure, right? So we have a header, so we're going to create a header element here. Now we're also going to have a main element, right? So we're going to say main, and then at the bottom, usually you have a footer, right? So this is like a typical structure. Okay, so then here in the header, we're going to have that, logo, you could say, and the links. So the logo is not an image. So usually the logo is an image. Here we're just going to make it some text. Usually you want to wrap the text in a P tag. So I'm going to say P. And the name of this project, of this website, is Evento. And let's actually also give these elements a class because we're going to style them. So let's actually give this a class of logo. And let's actually give the header and the main element and the footer elements a class as well. So header is going to have a class of simply header. Right, this looks a bit strange. Why are we not just selecting by tag? And one of the reasons is simply to be consistent, right? So we want to have one way of styling all of these elements, of selecting all of these elements. There are certain benefits that come from having that consistency, but it's a bit of an advanced topic, to be honest with you. But if you just remember, use one way of selecting elements and you'll solve a lot of issues. If you just remember that, then you'll benefit from that. So we'll give this a class of main.
That's a very good piece.
Right, and we're not selecting the body by class because there is only one body possible actually. So and also this is like very high up in the HTML3. So we can get away with just selecting by tag here. This is simply how people do it in practice quite often as well. Right, so I'm just showing you how people do it in practice. Sometimes things are not super logical. For example, the name for this HTML file. Why is it indexed HTML? Well, this is just how people have always done it. It's a remnant from the past, and people have not changed from it. So this is how they do it in practice. Okay, so we have the header here. We have the logo. Now on the other side, we want to have those links.
It's an example of if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right. And usually people do this as a list, right? So in the header, you have a list of links. Now, if you have a list, we've seen that we have a UL tag, right? And we can also give this a class, right? I don't have to write out class completely, by the way. If you just write C, or actually only the C, Emmet will already give you the suggestion of class. So you can just press tab, and here we will say links. So in a list, you have list items. So you have the LI tag for that, and actually, LI. And these also need a class of link-item.
Need to convert that
We'll create more LIs in a second. So then if you look here, this is a link, right? So a link, we have a tag for that, the anchor tag. So it's going to look a little bit complicated here, but here we're going to have another element, right? So the A, we're going to use the A tag with the following href. Right, so this would be a link to the concerts page. Now we have two other list items here. And actually, let's also give this anchor tag a class of, this is the actual link, right? So we can just say link. Okay, so we have two more. So we need to select the entire LI here and just paste it 2 more times. So we also have sports. And we also have conferences. Right, so just change that. And
sports and conferences. Okay, let's map that.
then we are finished with the markup, the HTML markup for the header. So I'm going to save here, and now we can start styling this. If you save it, by the way, you will already see the content here on the page. Right? So this is what HTML alone will give us, and this is not pleasant to interact with or to consume. Right? So with CSS, we can style this, make it look better, really make it a more enjoyable experience. Right? So if you have that, we can go to the CSS. Now, I like to add some comments, actually. We haven't talked about comments yet, but what you can do is you can say /**, and then in all caps, header, */. This is a comment, right? So the browser won't do anything with this, but I like to add comments here to add a little bit of structure in the CSS. Also here at the top, I like to add a comment here, ***, base style.
Oh, if
So
you're
these are really
on
like the
VS
base
Code, you
styles
can
for the
just do
page.
control //
And the only reason I'm adding these is because as your file becomes bigger, as your project grows, you have to start scrolling up and down, right? So you can easily sort of navigate around the file because you're going to see these comments, right? In HTML, we also have comments, by the way. So for example, if I select this and I do control /, I get this, right? So this is a comment.
Yeah, the exclamation mark commenting was for HTML, not for CSS.
Now, right? So this is how you would create a comment with these symbols in HTML. And what happens is if you do this for the last link item, for example, it's going to be gone now. We have commented out this element, as people would say, right? Because the browser sees the comment and it won't do anything with that, right? So let me uncomment this. Right, so developers use comments in their files just for help for the developer. Okay, so now let's actually start styling the header. So let's see, we have a header, we have logo, links, link item, and link. Let's actually select all of them. Let's see if we can remember. So we have .header, right? It's like, these are all classes. .logo, .links, .link item, and lastly, .link.
Can you have a dot inside the class name? I haven't seen the
Okay, this is what we have so far.
specified, I guess.
Let's actually start with the logo. Let's see. The logo simply needs to be a little bit bigger and a little bit bolder. So we're going to say font size 18 pixels. And to make it bolder, we have those weights.
Didn't I add? I don't think I added logo to that. Let's do that.
And so we every font has a weight or different weights. So here we want it pretty bold. So we can say font weight of 700. This is pretty bold. Now it's bolder. Okay, so this list has default styling with these bullet points. Right? So let's actually work on that list. It has a class of links. And we don't want those bullet points.
Yeah, it looks bold.
Right? We don't want that. So we can say list style. We can actually remove them. Right? So we can say none. Right? So if we do this, now those bullet points are gone. Now these are anchor tags. And anchor tags are styled like this in a blue color with like an underline. Right, so the rest of the page, sorry, the rest of the text has white color, right? Because here in body, we set the color to white and other elements will inherit that, right? For some reason, the creators of HTML or the people who maintain the standard, they have decided that anchor tags should still be like this, right? So with a blue color. So for some reason, they're not inheriting that right now. So what we can say is we can go to link, right? This is the class for those anchor tags. And we want to do two things basically. We want to remove that underline, let's start there. So we can say text decoration. Right, so right now it actually has underline here. This is default styling from the browser. We can remove that. We don't want any underline. Right, so now at least that's gone. And the color should not be blue, right? It should actually inherit it, right? So we actually have the keyword inherit to force the links to inherit that white color from the body, right? So then we have that. And actually, when we look at the example, they are not completely white. They actually have a lower opacity, and only when you hover them do they have that completely white color, right? So they should be a little bit see-through. So the color here should not be inherit. It should actually be, we can actually set it to white, but with a lower opacity. So with RGBA, right? Whenever you're working with opacity, you want to use RGBA because you can set the opacity. So with white, it's 255 for all of them, and then for the opacity, that's what the A means. It's alpha, the alpha channel. You can set it to 0.75. Right, so now you can see they're a little bit darker. It blends in a little bit better with the background image as well, I think. And we also want to set a font weight for them. A little bit bolder, right? So the default is 400. We're going to make it a little bit bolder, 500. This is medium. And they should be a little bit smaller as well. We're going to set the font size to 14 pixels. Okay, now what we also want is when we hover these links, they become brighter, right? Because right now they have an opacity of 0.75. So when we hover them, the opacity should simply be 100% or 1. Right, so we have seen how that works. So we can say .link in the hover state, right? Meaning when we go over it with our mouse, the color, we can actually just copy this. The color should not be 0.75, it should simply be 1, right? 100% opacity. Right? If you save that and try it out, you can see they become bright once you hover them. Now this is not very smooth, right? So this is instant, right? So we can make it smooth by using transition, right? So you have to go to the rule set with the normal selector. And here we can say color, any change, any transition in the color property, that should happen not instantly, but in 0.4 seconds. Right, so if you do that and then try it again, you'll see it's much smoother. I think that looks really good, right? Now, we say color here, right? So we are specifying that this transition should be for the color property. In practice, people write all, right? So for any property that gets changed, not just the color, we can have other properties that we change when we hover it. For all of them, it should happen in 0.4 seconds, right? So this is also what we're going to use. We're not going to write out the specific property every time. We're just going to say for all properties that get changed, it should happen in 0.4 seconds.
I didn't
right, so
know
it still works the same. All right, so then we get to the issue of the layout, because the layout right now is, of course, not correct. In the example here, you can see, well, let's actually start with the list itself. So these links, they should sit horizontally next to each other, right? So, and then of course, they should sit horizontally, the list itself should sit horizontally on the same line as the logo, right? So this is a layout. This is what we refer to as a layout. And there is a very powerful mechanism or method of doing layouts in CSS, which is called Flexbox. Now, I'm saving Flexbox for the intermediate part of this course because it's a bit of an intermediate topic, but I still want to introduce Flexbox to you right here, right? So Flexbox works with a parent element and child element. So here we have the UL. This is the parent element of these LIs. right? And we want these link items to sit horizontally next to each other, right? That's the layout that we want here, right? And then we'll work on the logo and the list. But in the list itself, the list items should sit horizontally next to each other. So what we can do is we can go to the parent element, the links here, and here we can use Flexbox, right? And again, you don't have to understand this right now. I just want to show you, some of the things it can do. So what you can say here is display on the parent element. You can say display flex. And if you do that, the default behavior is that the flex items, which are the child elements, right? These link items, they're going to sit on the same line, right? So that is indeed the layout that we want.
Okay.
And let's see, we also want some space. We want some space between them, right? So, one thing we could do is we could simply say margin, whoops. We can say margin on these link items, that's the LI. We can just give each one some margin on the right of 25 pixels, right? So now they have more space between them. Okay, so now the next step is to get this list on the same line as the logo, right? So if we look here in the HTML, right, so now we have the header here. The header is the parent element of this logo and this list of links, right? So we can use the same trick with Flexbox, right? And it doesn't matter that we already use Flexbox here. We can nest them and it works as expected. And again, you don't have to understand this completely right now, but for layout, this is what you want to use in practice. So we'll talk much more about this in the intermediate section. But what we can do is we can make the header, we can go to header, and we can use the same trick. So we can say display flex, right? And the default behavior is that the child elements, the logo and the list, they will sit on the same line. Right, so now they're sitting here. Now you can see they are not aligned perfectly in the center here. Right, so the list it looks like it's sitting a little bit too high, and we want them to be centered vertically. This is also something we can do with Flexbox. So with Flexbox, not only can we align the flex items, as they're called, the child elements of the header in this case, because we say display flex on the header, which makes the header the so-called container or flex container, and the child elements are the flex items. So we can then determine what the layout should be of those flex items, and that goes for horizontal and the vertical axis. So vertically, if we want them to be centered, we have a property for that in Flexbox called align items, and we can say, well, the flex items, they should be centered vertically. Right, so now they are centered vertically, and we can also determine how they.
Okay. You see this visually going to be sense. Oh, I see. It's a bit like it's positioned a bit upward. So if we do align the center, they just all the things in the flex box like is aligned in the center.
They should sit horizontally, right? So maybe, well, not maybe, we know that they should be sitting, apart from themselves, right? So the list should sit all the way here. The logo should also sit all the way here, right? So we have another property in Flexbox that can deal with the horizontal axis, right? So we have align items for the vertical here, and here we use justify content for the horizontal axis. And here we actually have a property called, or value called space between. And the name already says it will put as much space between the flex items as possible, right? So this is a very powerful module in CSS called Flexbox. You don't have to understand this right now, but this is basically the go-to way of doing layouts in CSS. So whenever you run into an issue of layouts, you want to use Flexbox most of the time. Okay, now the problem here, of course, is that the logo is sitting right against the edge here, and the list is sitting right against the edge here as well. In the example, we are constraining the width of the entire page here, basically, right? So
I think this is a good part to in the stream. We have reached our target of 2 hours, and yeah, I am very happy for that today. We've learned quite a lot. Or at least I've learned I learned some new things in HTML and CSS. So yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Till then, take care. This is me signing off.